Have you ever really thought about how we tend to frame things like weight loss?
Mm.
We focus on calories, willpower, discipline. Seems pretty standard, right? But what if maybe that common way of thinking is actually hiding something deeper, a less obvious truth? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try and peel back the layers on today. We're doing a deep dive into semaglutide, but probably not in the way you usually hear about it. We're not really looking at it as just a weight loss drug. No, we're exploring it as well, a catalyst for something maybe more profound. We've got insights from two really interesting sources here. I'm meeting with my friend Dan Hollis on semaglutide and his Dan Hollis FAQs. And just quickly, for anyone not familiar, semaglutide, it's a medication, mimics a gut hormone, helps regulate appetite, blood sugar, that kind of thing. But Dan Hollis, he argues the real impact isn't just physical, it's psychological, a reset.
Exactly. And our mission here, it isn't just to talk about, the drug itself or weight loss numbers. It's really about decoding what Dan Hollis calls emotional amnesia.
Emotional and
Yeah, that state where maybe we've used things, especially food, as a coping mechanism to kind of numb ourselves to deeper feelings, avoid issues. We sort of forget the emotional roots. We're digging into this really big question he poses. What if you weren't broken? Just confused?
yeah.
So our goal is to figure out what Dan really means when he says semaglutide isn't the solution. It's more like the signal, or maybe the pause button, a way to maybe uncover something more authentic inside yourself.
Okay, so where do we even start with this? It feels like a pretty radical shift. Dan Hollis kicks things off by challenging, well, basically everything we think we know. He says the conventional view, calories, carbs, discipline, is just wrong.
Right, flat out wrong.
He says it's about something else and something nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
That's a pretty bold statement, It pushes against so much advice we hear.
It really does, and that's something else. Well, that's where it gets fascinating. His main insight, the core idea, is it was never about the food.
It was never about the food.
Oh.
Simple, but
Wow.
changes everything, doesn't it?
Completely. Think about it. Years, decades maybe, of focusing just on the plate, counting every single bite. Dan just flips that. He says we've been treating the symptom, not the actual cause.
So he's not selling diets then.
No, not at all. His whole thing is decoding emotional amnesia. It shifts the whole conversation away from, lose weight fast, which we see everywhere,
Right.
to something much more, well, empathetic, I think, that question. What if you weren't broken, just confused?
It feels kinder somehow.
It does, and he teaches people to sit in it long enough to learn something from it. It's about understanding, not just willpower or suppression.
Okay, so if it's not about food, but about this emotional amnesia,
Yeah.
where does the semaglutide actually fit in? What's its role in this picture? Dan has this really striking way of putting it. He says it gives you a moment where food stops talking.
Stops talking.
Yeah. And for some people, that's the first honest moment they've had in 20 years. That sounds huge.
It is huge.
If food has been this constant background noise, or maybe comfort or distraction, what does that silence actually feel like? Is it just relief? Or is it weird?
Well, Dan talks a lot about this idea of silence. He says, semaglutide gives you silence, and silence gives you truth.
Silence gives you truth.
So this quiet, it's not just like your stomach not rumbling. It's an opportunity, a real reset, he calls it, or a pause button, a signal. It's a chance for people to finally face maybe the underlying emotional stuff that food was covering up.
Instead of just reacting all the time.
Exactly. You get to observe. And apparently Dan himself was really taken back by it. He called the quiet the most surprising part. Said he didn't realize how loud food was in my life until the cravings were gone.
Wow.
Yeah, he found the silence unsettling and strangely beautiful. Realized just how much mental space food had been occupying.
Okay, so the drug works, it creates this silence.
Yeah.
But then why do people still struggle? Why do they sometimes fail, as Dan puts it?
Yeah, that's the crucial part, isn't it?
It seems like it. He says something really telling. People don't fail because the drug doesn't work. They fail because no one taught them what to do with the quiet.
Exactly. That's the core of his argument.
And he points out that this quiet, this silence, it can actually be scary.
Right. Because maybe you feel like you lost their favorite lie?
Yeah.
That old coping mechanism is gone?
And so people might just run back to what they know. The cheese puffs, cheat days, chaos, as he calls it.
It's like, yeah, turning off the constant background noise and suddenly you're just there with your thoughts. That can be confronting. And this leads right into the idea of emotional relapse. Dan's very clear. People don't relapse because the drug stops working.
Okay.
They relapse because no one helped them rebuild the emotional framework that food used to support.
Ah, the framework.
Right.
Yeah.
So feeling anxious or weird when the cravings stop, that's actually, according to him, totally normal.
Really? Wow.
Because for so many people, food wasn't just fuel, it was comfort, control maybe, a way to soothe yourself, maybe even part of your identity.
Okay. And when that just disappears, it can feel, he says, like losing a friend. A problematic friend, maybe, but still
Yeah.
familiar,
Right.
consistent.
So it's a loss.
It's a real loss that needs to be
Yeah.
acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to process that.
So this quiet space, it sounds incredibly powerful, but also, potentially really disorienting. Makes me wonder then, how does Dan actually help people through that? What does he do? Is it like a strict diet plan or?
No, not really a diet plan in the traditional sense. This is where his approach gets really unique, I think.
Yeah.
He doesn't just, hand over the medication and say good luck.
Right.
He talks about building scaffolding in the space semaglutide opens, providing things like framework, identity, ritual, language.
Scaffolding. Like support structures.
Exactly. He has this great line about rewriting the story people were too full to finish.
I like that.
And he contrasts his way directly, says, most programs hand you a syringe and wish you luck. I hand you a map.
A map for the quiet. A map for the quiet, yeah. Because he warns, semaglutide isn't the solution, it's the signal. And without structure and support, it'll amplify your confusion just as fast as it lowers your appetite.
Wow. Okay. So the support is absolutely key.
Essential. It's about deep, fundamental change, not just a quick fix for the scale. Building that inner architecture, he calls it.
Inner architecture. Okay. So we've got the philosophy down. Let's maybe get into some of the practical stuff, things people would likely ask, which Dan covers in his FAQs, like the off-ramp. What happens when someone stops taking semaglutide? That's a big concern.
Yeah, definitely a common question. And his point is critical here. He says, if you don't have a strategy, the biology takes over. Simple as that.
Biology takes over.
Which is why he says, I never start someone on semaglutide without a clear off-ramp.
So the goal isn't necessarily lifelong medication.
Not necessarily, no. The
Yeah.
goal is using the medication as a tool, a temporary support, while you build the internal strategies, the coping mechanisms, the insights to manage things after the silence.
So you're prepared for when the drug isn't the main thing anymore.
Exactly. You've built the skills.
Okay. What about things like cheat days or clean eating? So much of dieting revolves around that black and white thinking.
Yeah, he really pushes back on that. He talks about pattern mastery over perfection.
Pattern mastery.
Yeah, and he makes this really strong argument. If your system can't handle a slice of cake without spiraling, then we haven't taught it flexibility, we've taught it fear.
That's powerful. So it's about resilience, not rigidity.
Exactly. Building a healthy, flexible relationship with food that can handle life, basically, without everything falling apart.
What about the common thing where people lose weight fast initially, but then stall? That plateau can be so frustrating.
Yeah, the plateau. He explains it simply. The body adapts. It's natural.
Right.
That initial fast drop is nice, sure, but it often triggers metabolic slowdowns. The body's trying to conserve energy. But his philosophy is really about the long game. You're not here to win the race, you're here to finish it.
Patience, then. Understanding the body's process.
Patience, understanding, and focusing on sustainable changes, not just the quick wins.
And the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
how do you actually keep the weight off after all the yo-yo dieting so many people experience?
Well, according to Dan, it boils down to identity work, not just another diet.
Identity work. How so?
It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need weight loss as a project anymore.
So it's not about white-knuckling it with discipline forever?
No. He says, you don't hold on to weight loss with discipline. You hold on to it with alignment. Alignment with who you've become through figuring out all that emotional stuff.
Alignment. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What if someone listening has tried and, failed dozens of times before? They might feel hopeless.
Yeah, that baggage is heavy. But Dan's perspective is actually really empowering. He says, good. Good. That means you've tested what doesn't work. Now let's build what does.
Okay, reframing failure as data.
Exactly. He always emphasizes, failure is only failure if you don't learn anything. Past attempts aren't setbacks. They're intel for finding a better way forward.
So how does he measure success then, if it's not just the number on the scale going down?
Definitely not just the scale. For him, success is measured by how many coping mechanisms we've replaced with real tools.
Replacing old patterns with healthier ones.
Right. He believes weight loss is a side effect of clarity.
A side effect of clarity.
Wow. Ultimately, it's about rebuilding connection. Connection to your hunger cues, to your purpose, to yourself. It's a whole person transformation.
It's really clear that this is deeply personal for him. Why does he care so much?
Yeah, he's very open about it. He says quite simply, I was the guy who couldn't lose weight, who felt broken, who was ashamed to ask for help.
Ah, so he's been there.
Absolutely. He says he built his program so nobody has to go through that alone again. That personal experience definitely fuels his approach.
That makes sense. Okay, one last thing we probably need to touch on. The whole cheating thing.
Mhm.
Taking medication like semaglutide.
Hmm.
Lots of people whisper that it's, cheating the system.
Yeah, that word comes up a lot. It's loaded, isn't it?
It is.
Dan has a very direct counter to that. He basically says, if your body's biochemistry is rigged against you, using science to unrig it isn't cheating, it's adapting.
Adapting, not cheating.
Right. And then he adds, the real cheat is pretending willpower was enough.
Oof. That's a strong point.
It is. He argues that for many, there are real biological factors making weight management incredibly hard. Using science to address those isn't a moral failing. It's just smart. It's leveling the playing field, you know?
Yeah. Leveling the playing field. That makes a lot of sense. Wow. So this whole deep dive, it really feels like it's uncovered a huge shift in thinking about weight, sure, but also food, and maybe most importantly, our relationship with ourselves. It's about using that moment of silence he talks about, using it to rewrite a deeper story, one that maybe got interrupted or muffled before.
Absolutely. And connecting it all, it reminds me of something else Dan reflected on about hope. He said, hope wasn't when I saw the number drop. It was when I went to bed and didn't feel like I had to start over the next day.
That feeling of continuity, not constant battle.
Exactly. A sense of peace with yourself.
Mhm.
And this whole process he describes, it's not about punishment for the past. It's repair.
Repair.
Yeah. And the real challenge, maybe the real victory, is staying in relationship with yourself while you do it, not abandoning yourself during the hard parts.
Staying in relationship with yourself, that's quite profound. So maybe something for all of you listening to think about. Your own relationship with habits, maybe with control, and with the noise in your life. What might that kind of silence reveal for you?